Shinpei stood on the deck of the ferry as it approached Wakayama Island, the salty breeze tousling his dark hair. He was returning home for the first time in 2 years. In the distance, he could already see the island's familiar coastline emerging from the mist, with the town's quaint buildings huddled together like whispers of memories. But his thoughts were weighed down by grief, and by the face that had haunted his dreams since he left Tokyo. In his dream, Ushio smiled as she handed him a small gift, her eyes glistening with tears. "Give my regards to everyone at home," she said softly, "and take care of my sister Mio." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I can't do that anymore." He woke with a jolt, shouting Ushio's name, and collided with a buxom woman in the cabin, earning a stinging slap. Disoriented, he apologized profusely, and by the time the ferry docked, he had a red mark on his cheek and a swirl of questions in his head. After docking, the air was thick with the summer heat where he saw Ushio's younger sister Mio coming to welcome him riding her cycle. But she couldn't stop the cycle and fill in the ocean. After changing her cloth, they made their way to the familiar Kufune family restaurant, where Mio burst into tears as they embraced. "I'm so glad you're here," she sobbed. Together they walked to the funeral home. Shinpei couldn't shake the memories of his own orphaning 10 years ago when the Kufune family took him in. Ushio and Mio had been like sisters to him, but now, with Ushio's coffin before him, all he could do was stare blankly at the closed casket. He overheard whispers from the mourners. "Dr. Hishigata performed an autopsy on Ushio's body but found nothing unusual." At that moment, a blinding camera flash stunned everyone. In the confusion, Shinpei was hugged tightly by Sue, Ushio's childhood friend and the son of Dr. Hishigata. "I'm so sorry, Shinpei," Sue muttered, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't save her." He explained how Ushio had drowned while saving a young girl, Shiori Kobayakawa. Since then, Shiori had fallen into a deep silence. Sue promised to call Shinpei later that night with more details. Back at the restaurant, Shinpei cooked a pot of curry and pondered over Sue's words. Later, Mio was standing outside in her school uniform, staring at their house as if she were seeing it for the first time. A police officer approached her, a relative named Tetsu, but Mio seemed distant. When Sue finally called, he told Shinpei that his father hadn't performed any autopsy on Ushio. The police had found strangling marks on her neck, but couldn't find enough evidence to pursue a murder investigation. The case had been ruled an accidental drowning. Before going to bed, Mio knocked on Shinpei's door, handing him Ushio's necklace. "I'll never forgive the one who killed my sister," she vowed through her tears. The next morning, Officer Tetsu arrived at the restaurant, grim-faced. "The Kobayakawas vanished this morning," he announced. Mio trembled violently, darting out the door in a panic. Shinpei rushed after her. She revealed that Shiori had been acting strangely since seeing someone who looked like her in the mountains. She always felt like someone was watching her. A grizzled hunter named Nezu warned them about a phenomenon called shadow sickness. According to legend, shadows could replace people and then target their families. "If you're afflicted," Nezu growled, "you've got to cleanse yourself at the Haruko Shrine." Mio remembers that 3 days before Ushio's death, Mio and Ushio had seen Ushio's shadow at the beach. Shinpei and Mio decided to investigate the shrine, but found it deserted. In the bushes, they spotted Shiori's figure watching them. They chased after her, but a gunshot rang out, and they stumbled upon the mysterious woman from the ferry, bleeding profusely. "Get help!" Shinpei shouted, and Mio dashed into the woods. But the woman tried to say something to Shinpei before being shot dead by an unseen assailant. In the chaos, Shinpei looked up and saw another Mio holding the real Mio at gunpoint. He barely had time to process the shock before the shadow shot Mio and then Shinpei. Shinpei jolted awake, bumping into the busty woman from the ferry again. His breath quickened as he looked at his phone. July 22nd. Hadn't it been the 23rd? He dismissed it as a dream, as he reads a novel called Swamp Man by Nagumo Ryunosuke. After docking, he tried to stop Mio from falling in the ocean, but he fell instead. Then he noticed that Mio's cycle's brakes were tampered with. At the funeral, he realized that he had gone back in time. He needed to save the Kobayakawa family first. Later that night, he wandered along the beach, deep in thought, when he heard Officer Tetsu talking to someone. He squinted through the darkness and saw Mio in her school uniform, but her movements were uncanny. A knife flashed in the moonlight, and Tetsu crumpled to the ground, stabbed to death. Mio's shadow produced a camera flash, copied Tetsu, and made his body vanish, leaving a stain on the ground. As Shinpei crouched in terror, Sue called, and Mio's shadow discovered him. She stabbed him in the neck, dragging him into darkness. He awoke to Ushio's voice again, clearer this time. "Be careful. This power is limited." Shinpei surfaced once more on July 22nd, after falling into the ocean. He went home and noticed his reflection in the mirror. One eye had turned a different color. That night, he set up his phone outside to record Mio's shadow and finally had evidence. The next day, he showed Mio the recording, revealing the shadow staring at her house with a knife. Mio was the target. Shinpei had just witnessed something strange, a shadow copying process, and he knew he needed to warn Shiori without putting their friend, Mio, in danger. Finding the family's shop closed, he decided to visit their neighbor, Xiaomi, to check on Shiori together. When they arrived at the house, it was eerily quiet. Dinner was left uneaten, and on the floor were two shadow stain marks the size of adults, along with signs of a struggle. Cautiously, Shinpei and Xiaomi headed upstairs. As Shinpei reached for the light switch, a flashlight blinded him. It was Shiori, but not the Shiori he knew. She was a shadow. Before he could react, she made a copy of him and then quickly escaped out the bathroom window. With Shiori gone, Shinpei turned his attention to another mystery. A woman he had seen shot in the woods who was carrying an unusually large suitcase. After failing to find her, he met Tetsu at a restaurant. Tetsu gave him a phone, saying it belonged to Ushio before she died. Ushio had entrusted the phone to Tetsu, sensing her end was near. As they talked, Sue joined them and Shinpei explained everything. Trust was thin. Shadows and humans were indistinguishable. Mio suggested they all visit the shrine the next day, during the summer festival, when the crowd could offer some cover. Agreeing, they set a password to confirm their identities upon meeting again. As rain started, they found shelter. Mio gave Shinpei her sister's necklace, urging him to stay on the island with her. Shinpei tried to access the phone but couldn't unlock it. Sue, Toki, and Mio, dressed in yukatas, arrived to head to the festival. At the festival, as Sue shared his feelings for Mio, Shinpei noticed a familiar strand of Ushio's hair. He excused himself and followed it to the beach. There, standing in the ocean, was Ushio. She turned and their eyes met. Ushio approached Shinpei and hugged him. They fell to the ground together, and Shinpei, in shock, struggled to believe what he was seeing. Then he noticed the necklace around her neck and stammered, "You're dead! You must be a shadow!" Ushio's memories were foggy, but tears welled up as she confessed her love to Shinpei, explaining that her last wish was to see him again. As fireworks lit up the sky for the summer festival, she expressed a desire to experience it with him. In a panic, Shinpei led her away from prying eyes, hiding her in a storage area while Mio's shadow, unnoticed, roamed the festival. Inside the storage, Ushio shared memories from their childhood, though she couldn't recall her own death. Suddenly, Mio called Shinpei's phone and Ushio answered. Shinpei quickly took the phone, assuring Mio that she hadn't heard her dead sister's voice. After instructing Ushio to stay hidden until the festival ended, Shinpei joined his friends at the ceremony. There, Su confessed his love for Mio in front of Shinpei and Tokiko. Mio turned him down just as Ushio appeared, wearing a poor disguise. Shocked, Mio accused her of being a monster. Shinpei embraced Ushio tightly, vowing not to let her go. The group was stunned, realizing that the Shinpei holding Ushio wasn't their Shinpei, despite him knowing the agreed-upon password. This Shinpei was another shadow. Rewinding 10 minutes, the real Shinpei encountered Mio's shadow in a frenzy. She attacked, displaying strength beyond human limits, and pinned him to the ground. As Shinpei's shadow copied his memories, including the password, Mio's shadow prepared to kill him. However, his shadow intervened, revealing its ability to rewind time, which could hinder their plans. His shadow then took his place, leaving the real Shinpei trapped and injured, warning him that he had failed to protect anyone. As Shinpei tried to break free, Mio's shadow snapped his arm and ominously mentioned that her mother would soon awaken. Just then, the woman from the ferry appeared and shot Mio's shadow in the head. As Mio's shadow lunged to stab the woman from behind, the lady who introduced herself as Nagumo Ryunosuke swiftly dodged the attack. She fired at the shadow on the ground, which dissolved upon being shot. Nagumo explained to Shinpei that she had come to save him, albeit slightly late. They found a safer spot to hide from Ushio's shadow, and Nagumo shared crucial information about the shadows. Their true form was the flat shadow on the ground, which they moved quickly to avoid being stepped on. Shadows scanned humans with light to copy their data before consuming them, leaving only stains behind, a theory developed by his sister. He also mentioned that the shadows seemed to be collaborating towards a sinister goal. Shinpei recalled the shadows' intention to revive their mother. Suddenly, a bright flash lit up the shrine area. When they arrived, they were met with a horrifying sight, everyone massacred, and a giant shadow that had just killed Tokiko. As Shinpei watched in horror, Su was struck down while trying to protect Mio. Nagumo managed to shoot the hand of Su's shadow assailant, but she was then fatally shot by the large shadow. As Shinpei reeled from the shock of the massacre, his mind numbly registered all the shadows in the area. The giant shadow told him he possessed the eye of his mother, capable of controlling time. The shadow began a dark ceremony, offering the corpses to his mother, who soon appeared as a red glowing figure in the sky. The shadows then began to consume the remaining humans, engulfing the entire island. In another part of the island, Su's father, Dr. Hishigata, spoke with a sickly shadow, revealing that their mother had recovered after consuming 1,000 humans. Nagumo confessed to Shinpei that had she believed the warning message sooner, they could have prevented the catastrophe. Desperate, Shinpei asked her to shoot him so he could return to July 22nd and alter events. As the large shadow attempted to intervene, Ushio's shadow emerged from the ground, striking it and providing Nagumo the chance to fulfill Shinpei's request. Before the shot was fired, Shinpei found himself floating above the island. As he approached the mother, she looked at him with surprise. Suddenly, he was pulled back through time. This time, he distinctly heard Ushio's voice advising him to be cautious, as his power to rewind time was limited. Shinpei found himself back to the moment he had fallen into the ocean to save Mio, realizing that his temporal save point had shifted forward. Meanwhile, Ushio's shadow remained stranded on the beach. Back in time, as Nagumo stepped off the ferry, she immediately noticed a shadow. Though she saw Shinpei and Mio, she mistakenly believed the Shinpei she was searching for was someone else. While walking through the streets, Nagumo spotted a banner announcing the funeral of Kufune Ushio, a name she recognized from her childhood. She decided to attend the funeral. At the funeral, Karakiri approached her, remarking on her absence from the island for 14 years. Everyone there knew her as Minakata Hizuru. She reunited with Alan, who shared that his wife had died after giving birth to Mio. Alan had since been running the restaurant, with the community's help in raising his 2 daughters. Hizuru remembered the girls from her earlier visits. When Alan revealed that the Shinpei on the ferry was the Ajiro Shinpei she was looking for, Hizuru tried to leave quickly to avoid him. But Alan stopped her to discuss the mysterious strangulation marks on Ushio's neck, which reminded him of Ryunosuke's death 14 years earlier. Driven by suspicion, Hizuru inspected Ushio's body in the casket and found that a nurse from the Hishigata clinic had covered up the marks. She questioned Alan about whether his daughter had encountered someone resembling her before she died, but he was unsure. Asaka, Shiori's mother and an old friend of Hizuru, approached her in tears over Ushio's death. However, Hizuru, sensing deception, confronted Asaka, realizing she was a shadow. Hizuru then met with Nezu the hunter, informing him that the Kobayakawas were all shadows. She explained that the shadows were multiplying under the influence of one that could create others. Overwhelmed by grief for Shiori and Ushio, Hizuru entrusted Nezu with a phone to alert her if it rang. Meanwhile, Shinpei discovered that all Kobayakawas were shadows, and deduced from the underwear Mio's shadow wore that Mio had been copied before July 22nd. Soon after, Mio's shadow created a shadow version of Alan. Shinpei, seeking Hizuru, received a cryptic note from Alan, which Shinpei recognized as a code from Nagumo's books. When Shinpei called the number, Nezu answered. After a brief conversation, Nezu instructed him to return to the funeral hall alone. There, Hizuru killed Alan's shadow, which had targeted him in the bathroom. Nezu, confirming Shinpei was human by shooting his shadow on the ground, revealed that the code could only be solved by someone aware that Hizuru was Ryunosuke, which meant only Nezu or Hizuru herself could recognize it. If anyone else called, it indicated a shadow had copied Hizuru's memory. When Shinpei finally met Nagumo, his excitement overshadowed the grim events. He eagerly asked for her autograph, still processing the situation. Hizuru, piecing together his unusual knowledge and actions, theorized that Shinpei was a time traveler, and she was correct. Now let me know your opinion about the story down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.